Hey everybody, I'm Mike Honeycutt, Product Marketing Manager here at Corero Network Security, and I'm filling in for our CMO, Mark Blackmer. And today I've got a special guest, Ashley Stevenson, our CTO. Ashley, it's great to be here, man. It's great to see you.
Always good to talk to you, Michael.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to diving into this threat intel report. I mean, we've had some incredible findings in the report. Before we get into the data and all the cool findings that we found, Ashley, can you tell us why a threat intel report is important? Why this annual report is a good thing to have?
Sure. Yeah, we certainly didn't start the process ourselves. It's been going on for decades now in the security space. That each year some of the leading security vendors issue their summary findings of the activities they've seen in the past year. But we definitely jumped on the bandwagon 10 years ago when we started monitoring our DDoS customers. And every year it's been a great experience to look back on the year we've just left, look at all the analytics and figure out what's going on, what trends we see, what motivations we believe are behind some of those trends, what new attack tools or defenses have been effective in the past year. So it's always good to make sure you learn from the past when you're planning the next year or two ahead, Michael.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and I imagine also to take the information and to also plan, right? So you're taking that information and learning how to adapt and evolve. So with that, let's get into some of the data. So in 2024, this is what the report encompasses. So we know that the report outlines what attackers perfected, and maybe you can go into some of the data and sort of the polarization of the data that we found.
Yeah, one of the things that's happened over the last 10 years that I've been actively involved in our threat intel report is that we see attacks all across the range from small to large, obviously different vectors. And what we're looking for in the bulk statistics that we collect is insights or trends that help us understand what the attackers are doing. And there's not just one type of attacker. We all are aware in the industry that there are criminal attackers, ideological attackers. There are, kids goofing off, attacking their school exam system or something, or their favorite sports adversary. But we're looking for the more serious stuff that impacts business and the networks that use our protection. So what we continue to see is a large amount of, sometimes we call it background noise, but attacks that are below the media impact radar. They don't make headlines. These attacks don't make headlines. They're not the subject of feeds on X or even security journals. But boy, they're there every minute of every day, pretty much almost to every IP address. Wherever you look in the internet, if you're running any size of network, you'll see packets that are most definitely DDoS entering your network. And we're trying to understand this year, particularly, what they're being used for. And are they linked to subsequent larger attacks, or are they linked to increased chance of a network, being attacked, being ransomed, and trying to join the dots, as it were, between that large background noise of small DDoS attacks and how they link to bigger, more serious, impactful DDoS events.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. And so, in one of the points that came out of the report, where 82% of the attacks were sub 1 GB. So, what does that mean for being able to see those attacks, and how do we combat them? And is that statistic surprising to you?
It's certainly not surprising, because we've seen it progress and advance over the years. But what is interesting is, DDoS attacks generally get bigger and are more frequent each year. What we have to also understand is the relative size of those attacks, because they're bigger in relation to last year's attack size. But during those years, during that last 10 years, for example, a lot of network connections have gone from 1 gigabit to 10 gigabit to 100 gigabit, and now we're selling 400 gigabit DDoS protection connections. So it's a little bit of a race, of the attack size versus the network connectivity size. So uh, when we went from 1 gig to 10 gig, the connectivity of networks jumped ahead a little bit of DDoS.
Mhm.
There were a lot of DDoS attacks that would be effective against a 1 gig connected customer that don't really do as much damage when the customer's got 10 gigabits of connectivity. Also, these days, a lot of business customers have multiple connection points. They still have internet access connections, but they might also have some internet exchange connections, or they might be doing dedicated peerings or dedicated connects to Amazon or other important, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. So the connection space has also got more diverse and complex in that same at that same time. But despite all of those changes, the large number of low level attacks still happening out there and still probing your network.
I think it's a fantastic point that you make, that it's relative to their connections, right? Because that's a really good point. It could seem small, but it's still very big. But so you know we saw a disparity, right? So the small attacks are huge, these less than 1 gig, and then we also saw the very large, so greater than 10 gigabytes, have actually increased. So maybe you can talk to why there is that disparity and what maybe led to the increase of the larger attacks.
Well, attacks in general have grown in relation to the size of the internet and the size of the connection. So the attackers are using that same connectivity that's growing for the defenders, just in a different way. And it's not just when understanding the impact of a DDoS attack, it's not just the size of the connection to the internet. That's certainly what governs whether you saturate the links to the internet. But once that traffic's entered the customer's network, it goes through often a series of other systems. They might have quite a high bandwidth core network, but then it might hit a top of rack server, which for years top of racks were connected at like 40 gigabits. And then it might have dropped down to a server, which for years were connected at 10 gigabits. Now more servers are increasingly connected with dual redundant 100 gigabit connections into the top of racks. So, but then within a server, they might have been hitting services or resources, that could only be accessed at a gigabit level. It's a very complex equation that favors the attacker rather than the defender. And the real message is you don't want DDoS in your network, because it will find or expose any weak points you have in connectivity or resource availability. So that's why, in our products, we focus on detecting as soon as possible and blocking as far upstream, or up the links as is available to us with the customer's network, Mike.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer. But how would, so let's talk about the smaller attacks. So how would an organization, know if they're being attacked at those smaller, attacks, right? Like how would they understand that against, like, do they just think it's just, bad internet traffic or weather, right? Just sort of normal congestion. How can they discern the difference?
Typically, the only way is if they have a DDoS protection product in their technology stack. If they don't, they're often not able to understand why there are variations in performance or load or CPU use, etc. DDoS attacks don't self-identify at that level. So if you let these attacks in, lots of these small attacks, you're probably suffering some kind of service degradation or temporary outage or unpredictable performance, and you don't know what's causing it. You don't know whether it's database lookups or access controls or genuine traffic levels, genuine customer request traffic levels. So that's why our message is that DDoS detection obviously is just as important as mitigation and protection. You've got to understand what's going on your network if you have an internet facing set of services that you want to protect and offer.
Absolutely. Visibility is absolutely key. So we actually had a question come in. What role does AI play in all this? So from the attack side, and then maybe you can explain also on the solution side.
Well, AI is having a big impact across the board in many industries and with many technologies. The kind of things we've seen AI influencing in the DDoS space, on the offensive side, we've seen examples of AI helping attackers reuse or repurpose existing code or assemble tools to generate attacks. We've not, interestingly, yet really seen AI generate totally new or novel types of attack, but we certainly see it assist, just like it is in many aspects of technology, assist people in doing something quicker, assembling things quicker or finding something quicker. So yes, it's improving the efficiency of the attacker in that sense. On the defensive side, it's also helpful in analyzing what's going on or collecting data, mining for attacks. I think, we even use AI in our own company to do a summary of the week's DDoS news. You don't have to pour through the articles anymore yourself.
Right.
An AI-based bot agent can sort through everything and organize things and present it to you in a high bandwidth way. So yeah, on both sides of the equation, it's helping people work more efficiently. Unfortunately, on the attack side, that means it's easier for them to maybe assemble a botnet or repurpose some, existing attack tools, etc.
Right. And so in that sense, it's easier for them to scale their attack.
Yeah,
right?
or it's reducing the skill needed to be an attacker, to be a novel attacker, because you can leverage the experience of others that have gone before you that's been gathered or analyzed by some kind of AI-based agent.
I love it. So let's shift now to, we're sort of talking about this evolution with the AI question, but how are attackers making, combating DDoS attacks harder? I mean, the report speaks to sort of vector switching, but maybe you can go into some of those details.
Yes. Again, we're trying to glean from the large amount of statistical data that we've collected. We're trying to glean the motivations or the methods behind them. Looking at any one attack doesn't really tell you much, but when you can look at hundreds or even thousands of attacks and examine how, what similarities they have, or were a certain types of attack more effective, you start to pick up some, signals, as we say, from the noise. The vector switching, if I was to contrast it to a few years ago, vectors were multi-vector attacks tended to be all the vectors at once, so that they were sort of additive in their impact. They'd throw in, just picking at some random numbers, but you might see 10 gigabits of a UDP attack with 5 gigabits of a TCP style attack with 20 gigabits of a DNS reflection, all rolled into one 70 gig or 100 gig attack.
Mm-hmm.
That was certainly effective in boosting the additive size of the attack, but and then they might stay on for the duration of the attack, an hour, giving attack tools chance to identify each vector and then knock it down. What we've seen more recently, though, is the vectors being applied sequentially, so one after the other, so that just because the attack started and you figured out what vectors being used, this is not necessarily a human, this was automatic in our product, but the product's figured out what to do and is making the appropriate protection, taking the appropriate protection actions, then the vector will switch very rapidly, like within 30 to 60 seconds. And then it'll switch again after another minute, and it'll rotate through a variety of different types of attack, or vectors as we call them, in a sequential train of an attack rather than all just showing up at the same time. So if defenses have a time to process or detect the attack, or they may be required to swing the traffic to a scrubbing center or to a cloud redirect, that could mean you might miss the first 10, 20 seconds of each of those vectors, effectively allowing half the attack to get through, even if you can successfully detect and block it once the attack shows up. So I think we've definitely seen that being used in a conscious way by attackers to generate leakage on the initial, 10, 20, 30 seconds or even minutes of a new vector showing up.
That's a great answer. So another question here: what are the advantages to having on-prem versus an on-demand cloud to handle these types of attacks?
The most common benefits that our customers feed back to us are the accuracy and precision of an on-premises protection solution that's dedicated to protecting them. It's not a shared resource in the cloud. The time to response is cited as talking about either instantaneous or in seconds, as opposed to tens of seconds or minutes. And then also the telemetry and metrics and feedback they get from on-premises protection, again, is usually much higher fidelity than they get from a remote mitigation solution. Although they both do have their strengths. We've seen a lot of customers moving to getting the best of both worlds, with on-premises protection up to their connectivity limits, and then holding in reserve the ability to redirect to a cloud-based solution if the attacks exceed their edge connectivity capabilities.
Right, and that's certainly something that we offer with our hybrid solutions.
Yes.
So maybe we can talk about the different layers of attacks. So we've got the network style attacks in 3 and 4, but maybe you can also talk about what we also pinpointed in the report was the layer 7 attacks and how they differentiate.
Yeah, so DDoS is interesting in that the majority of DDoS attack packets, they're genuine packets in the sense that they're well formed, they're valid. That in isolation they look perfectly good. So they, in isolation, they've got a reason to be on your network in most cases. And the layering of the attacks is really like which layer is being abused. So if you're getting an awful lot of L3 packets, that are trying to swamp out the network, we might call that an L3 attack. L4 would be at the next level, and then layer 7 typically is associated with the application layer. So in an L7 attack, you've got lots and lots of valid requests perhaps entering your network, and it requires processing to figure out which of those requests are good or bad. It's not efficient if you have to process every packet in order to figure out if it's good or bad, because that means the attacker's actually achieving their goal. And what we have seen with the growth in L7 attacks is that customers stay up and running, but they end up spending a lot more money to offer their service, because while peacetime traffic might have their auto scaling resulting in 10 systems are processing all the valid requests, when a DDoS attack comes in, their auto scaling kicks in because there's more traffic and more requests, and all of a sudden they're paying for 100 servers in the cloud to process the requests. 90% of those requests are duds and get thrown on the ground or aren't coming from genuine customers, but the customer's spending potentially 10 times as much in order to process them. So what the DDoS systems or other defense systems need to do is figure out some characteristics of the attacks or the attackers, like where the traffic's coming from, and somehow use that to more efficiently and effectively block those unwanted packets, perfectly valid but unwanted packets, from entering the L7 processing complexes. Otherwise, containers are going to be spun up, and auto scaling is going to kick in. Load balancers are going to send these requests to expensive resources in order to process them. Nothing's going to go down, but the customer is going to be running at a much more elevated processing level than the business requests justify. Complex situation. You see, Michael, it's like,
yeah, it is, and it seems like you as an organization and to sort of just to manage this, it seems like it could be very complex to have to understand this. So this is why it would be really good to have a solution, especially a managed solution, in place. And the other thing I was thinking about is just really all this comes back to service availability, right? I mean, so we talk about whether it's layer 3 through 7, it's still designed at stopping your business, ceasing operations. And I think that's the main takeaway from this report is these attacks are evolving. How do you stay ahead? How do you see that the signal and from all the noise, and then take actions to prepare to keep your services online?
Yeah, what I've seen in the in articles and communications discussions on this topic is everybody understands availability and resiliency and having backups for your data, or having redundant data centers for your service, or even something as simple as backup generators. They're all understood to be part of the availability model.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's still true, but I read several years in a row that you're more likely to have an availability outage through one of these technical cyber events than a natural event. So it's not going to be the hurricane or the snowstorm or the power outage. It's more likely to be the cyber attack that will impact your availability. So we need to treat this kind of protection with the same level of importance and value as we have typically given to the more mechanical or physical backup methodologies, having a second data center, or having off-site backups for data, or having redundant power, etc., or dual network connections. These days, the cyber vulnerabilities are just as important to your overall resilience.
Excellent point.
In fact,
so now I want to shift.
Just thinking ad hoc that, often now when we do get a natural disaster or an accidental outage, the first thing often comes up is, was it a cyber attack? You know what I mean? That's that's people's first question.
That is the knee jerk. Yeah.
Did that, when Heathrow went out because of a transformer fire, the press was full of, what was it, a cyber attack? Blah, blah, blah. Was it cyber terrorism? No, it was just I think in the end they found out it was just a mechanical failure, something like that. But people's first response is correctly
because it happens all too often, and it's highly publicized, right?
That's
and then you don't want your name attached to that event as a business, right? Like that's the last thing you want.
You'll note that we don't say we're not DDoS prevention. You can't stop DDoS attacks. We don't prevent DDoS attacks, but we prevent the impact of those attacks on your network. We're trying to prevent any outages. So you can't stop DDoS from happening out there because it doesn't require any pwning or breaching or compromise of your system in order for a DDoS attack to be launched against you.
That's an excellent point. So I'm going to shift the conversation to the business side of it, right? So, this was actually a very startling data point to me, that 68% of businesses struggle to justify the ROI, right? And so it's very interesting. And so what do you think that stems from? Is it a lack of understanding of the solution? Because given what we've just talked about in the threat landscape, you would think that, you would draw a connection as to why you should have a solution in place. But maybe you can opine.
Yeah, I think this is a normal cycle for a lot of kind of preventative or defensive technologies, or even like justifying the ROI of your life insurance or your home insurance and stuff. But or the cost of compliance. But what we find with customers who we're successful with and they go with our product is this becomes an easier thing to do. They end up with much better availability and SLA records. They often don't have excessive staff diversion or being occupied by chasing problems that aren't real. They may be the result of a DDoS attack. Obviously, these days there are regulatory and compliance benefits too for protecting the business, reputation protection. So I think this is more like what happens before you get engaged with the discussions or the equation. So obviously it's being helped by technology efficiency and costs, coming down, which they are. The cost per protection per megabit continues to go down. Of course, at the same time, people are connecting with higher bandwidths, but DDoS protection these days, most of our customers feel it's a very good investment for their networks and their service availability. Right.
Absolutely. So let's step back, and so let's just say you're an organization and you're reading this report, or maybe you've been a victim of an attack before. What are the steps you should take today to make sure that you do maintain service availability?
I think awareness of the pervasiveness of DDoS is important, right? One thing that's changed over the last few years is people used to think, oh, it'll never happen to me. My house will never catch fire, or the power will never go out, or there won't, the data center will never get flooded. Well, unfortunately, in the case of cyber attacks, the news is littered with companies who've fallen foul to, not having their software up to date, not having their firewalls patched. And the same thing's true for DDoS too, not having DDoS detection and protection in place. So I think it's, really that call to engage and understand what protection you do have in your network or your company, and is it sufficient for the threat level that we're seeing today, Mike.
That's a great answer. And so somebody just asked about our automation. They said that you mentioned automation earlier. Maybe you can go into some detail about how we detect and respond to attacks in an automated way.
Okay, yeah. DDoS is a little bit different from many of the other segments of cyber threats. If you think of breach, ransomware, data exfiltration, even firewalls and two-factor authentication, a lot of those technologies do not let you in or do not allow access unless you've proved yourself, authenticated yourself, the zero trust kind of model. The problem with
Right.
DDoS is designed to take advantage of unprotected resources. So with DDoS, you don't want the penalty of protection to be greater than the DDoS itself. So we're very conscious of not having false positives. In fact, ironically, it's better to allow a little bit of DDoS through than block the good traffic, right? If you get most of the DDoS, but there maybe is a little bit of leakage or spurious, that often is much better situation for the customer than stopping all the traffic, but in that tighter net, actually starving them of the real business the real packets that are generating their business. So what we've done is we've highly automated our product to err on the side of do no harm. So that allows us to have customers who run our products always on, always detecting, always ready to protect their networks. And that means they see very good response time to attacks as they come in. And without that kind of philosophy of do no harm, the automation would be quite honestly, it would be dangerous for them. And so for Corero, there's been a real focus on do no harm and high levels of reliable automation with negligible or not measurable false positive activity. So that's our philosophy, if you will, of automation at Corero.
And of course, we're always evolving the product, and the product is learning, and so we're also keeping up with the attacks that are coming in, so that we can better improve the product and its efficacy.
We do,
Correct.
yeah. We don't just say to our customers, trust us. We actually monitor and take account of what we've blocked, so we can always prove to a customer why we blocked something or why we let it through into their network.
That's awesome. So we've got a few minutes left. So are there any parting words or anything out of the report that you think is particularly compelling, or that you maybe you were like, wow, that's a really good point?
Well, I definitely encourage folks to take a read of the report, and also we encourage feedback too. We have a great dialogue with folks who are already our customers, but we're equally interested in hearing from other prospects in the industry, or even just people who have something to share with us. We're always learning in this space. There's always, as we were saying, every day those summaries of DDoS activity each week, they're fascinating to people who are in the trade, like the Corero team, and spend pretty much all their working days trying to combat malicious cyber activity in the DDoS space.
That's for sure. I mean, we eat, sleep, and breathe service availability. So that's what we preach around here. We're all about DDoS and keeping businesses online. And as you said, Ash, we we'd love for you to download the report. There's tons of data points that go into all sorts of things that we didn't mention today, including seasonality of DDoS, which is something we didn't touch on, but also, as we lean towards the second half of the year, going to be very important for businesses. So again, that report is free to all those who attend the webinar. Ash, this has been an amazing conversation. Time just flies when we talk.
Always enjoy talking about DDoS.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank all of you for attending. Again, the report is free to all those who watch, and we look forward to next time. Ash, thank you. Take care.
Mike, thanks everybody.
Thank you.